Hello everybody, recording live from somewhere. This is Zach Couples with episode number 43 of the Movement Debrief. And tonight, folks, is going to be alright. We're going to talk about packing the shoulder. Should you pack it when you press, when you row, when you do everything to and fro? We're going to talk about chiropractic adjustments. Are they good? Are they bad? Are you indifferent about them? Stay tuned. Last but not least, we're going to talk about unstable surface training. That's what's on docket tonight. Questions from the people, answered for the people, answered by this people. Fam recognize fam. But before we get into that, screw that. We're going to skip housekeeping today and let's debrief, shall we? First question comes from Tyler. Tyler asks, death to down and back? Question mark. What Tyler means by that is, should we be putting our shoulders down and back during rows? Should we be packing the shoulders during pressing? Is this valuable? Let me answer that for you, Tyler. First off, is there a place for packing the shoulder, and what is that? So if you go from a side view, gun show, it's 70s today, deal with it. What I would be coaching if I was packing the shoulders, it's kind of like external rotation, so I'm kind of locking it down and back in this position, so the scap is kind of doing that before I go do some type of overhead or upper extremity activity. And I understand what the theory is by trying to do that, and the big thing that's trying to occur with shoulder packing or going down and back is to create some scapular stability, giving yourself a stable platform to use your upper extremity. There's a problem with this. It assumes that what is underneath the scapula is congruent with the scapula itself. So for those who do not know, scapula is kind of shaped like this. If this would be the back side, this would be the front side of the scapula. Front side being, if you could strip me down body-wise, don't do that, and you saw the scaps from the front, they would be shaped like this. In a perfect world, we want a rib cage that's shaped like that, so it sits right underneath it. But rarely, ladies and gentlemen, do we live in a perfect world. Because the rib cage does all types of wild and crazy things. Sometimes it goes a little bit too much this way, gets too this position and pushes the scap off to the side. Sometimes it goes too flat and then you get the square peg and round hole syndrome. No bueno in either instance. So to say you're packing the shoulder and that's going to give you some stability, we don't know what the rib cage underneath it looks like unless we do some type of assessment, which rarely people do. So you have to assess, if you want to get true scapular stability, even though I don't think that's even necessary, you need to address the underlying rib cage first. Because that's going to give you a stable platform to do something with your upper extremity. Also, if we're doing pressing movements, doing this and trying to do like an overhead press like so, or a landmine, or a cable press, or a push-up, that's not necessarily a good thing, because there's this thing called scapulohumeral rhythm. Look it up. I'll put it in the show notes. But scapulohumeral rhythm means when I go to elevate my arm, the scapula should abduct and elevate. Give me a little bit of, it should essentially follow the rib cage up along the side as I raise overhead. If I'm packing the shoulder, I don't get that I don't get true scapulohumeral rhythm. So what you have to do is, during those types of movements, you want to allow the scapula to move. So you want it to protract. You want it to abduct, externally rotate, and upwardly rotate as you do things overhead. You don't want to lock it down and try to do a little something something, especially if you're doing something cable oriented. Not a good thing. All that being said, there are a couple times in which I'm not necessarily doing like pinch your shoulders and go down and back, but I do think setting the scapula up against the rib cage is essential, but not for the reasons you'd think. One would be if I'm setting up for a max effort bench press. If I depress my scaps, what that's going to do, and I'm setting up on a bench, is it's going to create a nice little arch in my lower back. If I'm benching, that's going to shorten the bar path if the intent is to move maximal weight. If I have to move a bar that is less distance, or if I have to move a heavy bar less of a distance, it's going to be easier for me to do it. So driving the shoulders down and then pressing from that position, I got no beef with that. Another instance in which I might cue something down and back, relative, is if you get someone rowing and you've adjusted thorax position first and they're still doing this kind of thing. So like think a one-arm dumbbell row over a bench, so I'm supporting myself on the bench and I'm doing that. Sometimes you can get this set up really good and someone's still going to do this. Homie, don't play that. What I will cue is to, instead of up shrugging, down shrug a little bit. Not crazy, but just down shrug enough so they can get true scapular retraction and not retraction and elevation. Those would be the two times in which I think that some type of down and back or not even, yeah, down and back position would be ideal. But in the bench, it's more just down, not necessarily retraction. In the row, it's down enough so you're in a relatively centered position to allow the scap to rotate along the rib cage. But in terms of doing these things with overhead pressing or other types of pressing, I think it's baloney. I hope you guys do too. So to summarize, packing the shoulder, you need to have a stable platform for that shoulder to sit on, i.e. a rib cage that matches congruency with the scap. That's piece one. Piece two, as we are pressing, reaching, rowing, the scap needs to be mobile along the rib cage. You have to follow through all the way, otherwise that puts the shoulder in a funky position. The two times in which it's cool to keep your scap relatively stable, setting up for a heavy bench, or if you're rowing and you got someone who's doing this and you've addressed the thorax first, cue a little bit of a down shrug. You do those things, you ought to be in business. Good question, Tyler. James asked a question on that Instagram, baby. James Fryer NMT, he's my boy. Would a wide infrasternal angle cause more trap problems then? So basically what James is saying, like in the case where you have someone who's reaching and rowing, are they going to be doing more of this, I would think. I don't think you can necessarily make that call that wide ISA or a narrow infrasternal angle leads to this. And the reason why I say that is because there's many different compensatory actions that can occur anywhere else in the body, and especially in the spinal regions, that could place the body into various positions to be more predisposed to utilizing particular muscles versus not. So I'll give you an example. Let's say I'm a wide infrasternal angle, and in this position, if I take my big breath of air in and I have an increased pump handle, I have less posterior thorax expansion, I'm actually going to be a little bit more of a down and back cat. But watch this. I can fake a down pump handle. That's going to let these guys migrate a little bit more forward and upward and have me be trapping all day and night, and not in a cool way. So you can't necessarily make the assumption that just because you have this ISA that's wide or narrow or asymmetrical that you're going to present with these different compensatory actions at the at any extremity for that matter. So you can't make that assumption, but what I would say is just address variability to the best of your capabilities and then train them and make sure you coach them into good positions. Good question, James. T-Rexes. Next question actually comes from Bay Rasco. Do chiropractic adjustments work? So, for those who don't know what a chiropractic adjustment is, if you haven't been to a chiropractor, basically it would be the snap, crackle, popping that they would do at particular joints. Typically the spine. Physical therapists also do something similar called manipulations, or depending on what state you are in, grade 5 mobilizations because of legislature. So does this stuff work? I'm glad you asked, Bay. I pulled up a couple systematic reviews just now. This most recent one is, and I'll link them. Let's not get it twisted. No, that one's old. I'm not going to use that. But this recent one in the Spine Journal, 2018, Manipulation and Mobilization for Treating Chronic Low Back Pain, a Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis. Now, I'm normally not an abstract kind of cat because I found out these cats are not peer-reviewed. But what we have is, let's look at the results. So basically what they did in this study was they did things that would compare if you did just like a snap, crackle, pop manipulation or an adjustment versus just straight joint mobilizations. And it looks as though, from what I'm seeing, is that the population was a little bit heterogeneous, so it's really hard to do strict comparisons. But what these authors did conclude was that there's moderate quality evidence that manipulation and mobilization are likely to reduce pain and improve function for patients with chronic low back pain. That was what this systematic review looked at. Manipulation appears to produce a larger effect than mobilization. Both therapies appear safe. So there is some merit to it. I don't think that it's a bunch of baloney by any means. And this is just one systematic review. But if you guys go to some of the Spinal Manipulation Institute stuff, and some of their courses, they probably would do a much better job of going through the evidence than I would for them. So I would definitely check them out, and I like some of their courses. Now the question is where does this fit? Well, I think for some people, this can be a very salient enough input that it can lead to a substantial change in symptoms. But that's not everyone. Some people need more than that. And that's really all that it is it's a large sensory input in the area in question that can lead to a lot of fancy-smancy neurophysiological things happening within the area that can alter blood flow, alter endogenous opioid and cannabinoid production, potentially alter muscle recruitment in the area, a lot of different things, and probably a lot of unknowns as well, such as non-specific effects, placebo effect, all of these things. Not saying that the placebo effect in a negative context, but effects that we can't necessarily measure that lead to a favorable result. I remember that there was a clinical prediction rule for cervical spine manipulation, and I'll have to look that one up, that stated one of the criteria that would show that cervical spine manipulation would work was if the patient thought that it would work. Now that has nothing to do with the technique itself, but clearly having that expectation led to a positive benefit. So there's a lot of things that go into it. And it may help with pain initially, but we have to ask ourselves what contributing factors got that individual into that painful state. And is there anything that we can address to help that? So maybe they have movement issues that need addressing, and maybe if they do some type of prolonged loading or however they got the initial injury, maybe if they had a little bit more movement variability, that would be a problem. Maybe they're out of shape, and maybe their tissues aren't as resilient as we need them to be, and if you take them through some type of training program, that could potentially help them. Maybe they're not sleeping well. If you don't sleep well, you are more likely to experience pain. Maybe they have a very inflammatory diet. We have to ask all of these other questions. I don't think that manipulation is going to solve any problems long term, much like any manual therapy technique will. But it can provide a short-term fix, and it's effective at doing so. But we have to look at all of the other factors involved that could potentially lead to someone experiencing pain or not. So to summarize, there is some research supporting chiropractic adjustments or manipulations. I don't think that they are the cure-all for a lot of things. I think they can work for some people. I've used manipulations in the past, I've used them in the present, and I've had some good success with them. I've had times where I haven't had good success with them too. But what we have to ensure is that we are doing things to help individuals become healthier, become better performers, and address some of the other things that may have been contributing factors within our skill set to make certain that they don't need us again from a rehabilitation standpoint. Dave, another phenomenal question. Before I answer this last one, let's see. Prashant Mukanavar, I hope I pronounced your name right, man, I'm sorry. He asked me a question on Facebook. How do you manage external rotation restrictions in the shoulder? It's a great question. So I'm going to assume that infrasternal angle was addressed, and I'll write that down. I'll link that in the show notes if you don't know what that is. And there's actually a post that I did I think it was last week or a couple weeks ago, another debrief where I talked about external rotation and what that means. I'll link that as well. But when I'm thinking external rotation, I'm thinking posterior thorax expansion is necessary if that is limited. Because if the posterior thorax can't expand like so, then that means it's relatively more flat. This leads to a relatively retracted position and posteriorly tilted position. That can allow for internal rotation to occur, but it may lead to a limitation to external rotation, one, because of the scapula position, but two, because the attachments of the pec major at the humerus and at the sternum are pulled eccentrically long. So what you have to do in that case is do something to expand the posterior thorax. I like quadruped activities, basically anything where you're reaching forward and taking a breath in to allow that to expand. Very effective. Prashant, phenomenal question. Last one for today comes from Lucy. Lucy asks, thoughts on unstable surface training. What does the research say about this? What is the best way to work on stability and balance? Which is what unstable surface training claims to do. Lucy asked a lot of questions, and I'll give a lot of answers. So first one, thoughts on unstable surface. Actually, let's go with the research first. So I pulled up a study. And I'll link this in the show notes, of course. And I was reading this one a little bit because I was pretty fascinated by it. This one is 2015, systematic review and meta-analysis, effects of strength training using unstable surfaces on strength, power, balance, performance across the lifespan. And let's talk about this study. So they looked at a bunch of different studies. I believe there was 22 studies met the inclusion criteria. And if we look at the quality of these studies, most of them were poor. On the Pedro scale, or if you're not familiar with that, I will see if I can find something. But basically it's like this I believe it's this 10-point scale where they measure the study strength. So there's certain things that we want in a study that show that it's high quality versus low quality. And most of these guys were pretty low. So on like the 10-point scale, most were like in the 4s or 5s. And on a lot of the things that they looked at, we found some interesting stuff. Most of the effects overall, in both cases, were pretty small to moderate. And in many cases, there were not much difference from stable surface training. And especially in older adults. If we look at the conclusions, I'll read that to you. Compared with controls, unstable surface training, effective improving muscle strength, power, balance in adolescents, inconsistent results were particularly found in adolescents and young adults when the specific effects were compared with of unstable surface training were compared with those of stable surface training. So we can't necessarily say that this is better than the other based on this systematic review. Take that for what it's worth. More research is needed. Duh. There was like one part in this where they did show that it was a little bit better at improving balance, static and dynamic balance, depending on how that was measured within the study itself, with unstable surface training. But this was only in young kids and young adults, not older individuals. So that's kind of like what the research says. There's nothing groundbreaking. But in this study's defense, there's nothing also super groundbreaking about stable surface training compared to controls. What are my thoughts? What's your goal? That would be my question. If the intent is to produce strength, power, endurance, balance, and you're not doing something on an unstable surface on a regular basis, then I don't see much benefit from that. Because the unstable surface unto itself will limit force production, will limit the intensity you can produce, and is a tremendous limiter. And if we're talking about transfer, which if you listen to the blog post this last week that I spoke with Charlie Reed, how can we say that doing something on an unstable surface will transfer to a stable surface? And I don't think we can make that leap. So I don't see much merit in utilizing these devices simply because of the question of transfer. What I think is the more prudent thing to be doing is to perform activities that are going to provide the most transfer to whatever your end task is. If your end task is to, look good naked, then you probably need to lift some weights. If your end task is to play basketball, well, I'll tell you what, ladies and gentlemen, LeBron James was good before he was hopping on Bosu balls and doing the silly things that he was doing. Play basketball. Do things that are going to provide the most transfer to your task at hand. And if the surface is completely different that you're training on, and you're thinking that's going to transfer, you're wrong. So I don't use unstable surfaces, at least for the lower body, and I can't even say I use them much on the upper body unless it's like unless you would count a bottoms-up kettlebell carry or a bottoms-up Turkish get-up, or maybe like a TRX push-up, where there's a little bit more instability within that. But in terms of lower body stuff, I don't necessarily use those things. So if you want to improve stability and balance, which would be the other question that Lucy asked, I would do things that challenge stability and balance on a stable surface. And in the weight room, that might be a single leg RDL or a split squat. Could be jumps, jumping and sticking your landing. Could be doing any type of explosive activity. Or you want to challenge your balance, why don't you go ahead and play football or do some type of fighting sport or anything, play basketball. Oh, that's going to be an incredible balance challenge, and likely going to give you a little bit more bang for your buck because the intensity level can be much higher in all of those domains. That's really the key, is we need to produce enough intensity that our system is challenged to be able to grow. And I just don't think you're going to get that from an unstable surface. So to summarize, the evidence is kind of, on unstable surface training. I'm not a big fan of it. The reason why I'm not a big fan of it is because of the problem of transfer. How can we say that unstable surfaces are going to transfer to stable surfaces, or even uneven surfaces such as hiking, which those aren't unstable, they're there, it's just they're uneven. What I think you should do instead is practice activities that are close to the task at hand that will help you reach your goals, whatever those are. So if it's a sport, play your sport. You will be challenged in balance with that, I can promise you that. If it's something weight room oriented, do things single leg, do things plyometric oriented, do things that create some type of perturbation that you have to control and fight against. And if you do those things, you ought to be in business. And I think that's probably a good stopping point for us tonight. I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in. Just mixing it up a little bit, you know what, I'm sizzling. And I'm sure you're wondering Zach, this was pretty good. Where can I find out more about you? Few ways you can. First, you should go to my blog, zachcouples.com. You guys will see my last blog this last week, which was a conversation between myself and Charlie Reed where we talked about variability, the problem of transfer, which I discussed a little bit today, and we talked about a bunch of other things. So you should definitely check that out. While you're there, you should also subscribe to my newsletter. In that, you're going to get almost 3 hours of me talking about pain and breathing. You're going to get 50 pages of notes on things. You're going to get a free, yes free, acute to chronic workload calculator. And you'll get weekend learning goodies every Friday where I give you a bunch of links of some things that I'm kind of interested in. You might be interested in too. Definitely hit me up there. You'll also want to go to the online services page. You can work with me one of 3 ways. Or all 3. Doesn't matter to me. First, movement consultations. If you're toy, you're not moving as effectively as you want to, maybe you got some boo-boos and you saw some people, ruled out the big bad stuff, you're like, hey, maybe if I move better, this will help. I can be your guy. Hit me up for an online movement consultation. Also, if you want to do some of this variability stuff, or you want to implement the things I talked about today a little bit better with your people, hit me up for the mentorship program. We'll work together, we'll problem solve, I'll make your processes more efficient, we'll do all types of wild and crazy things. Definitely hit me up for that. Also, you want to wear tank tops when it's 71 degrees as well? Hit me up for online fitness training. I work with people post-rehab. Got a marathon runner right now who I'm working with, helping her get to that. I work with people who are either fat loss or trying to get them gains. Whatever you want, I'll help you there. I'll be your guy. Hit me up for fitness training online. If you want to see me in person, live in the studio, I got 2 spots I'm going to be at this year. 1 confirmed, 1 highly potential. First, I'll likely be in Australia in July. We're still hammering out the details, but definitely hit me up there. Also, September 15th and 16th in Seattle, Washington. Sign-ups are going to be out soon. The Human Matrix is coming your way. If you want to learn about variability, power, and capacity, and how to implement that into your programs, definitely hit me up and check me out at The Human Matrix. Once you're done with that, you'll want to sign up for the Zach Couples Show on iTunes or Stitcher, whatever you prefer. Because guess what, folks? There's 42 other debriefs that you can listen to me in your car and not have to look at this ugly mug. Definitely check me out. And please give me a review so we can get the fam even larger. Social media platforms. I'm everywhere. Facebook /Z Couples. I post videos, do comments, we talk, we'll do all types of cool things. Definitely find me there. You can find me on that Instagram, baby. Instagram.com, Zach, Z-A-C, Couples, C-U-P-P-L-E-S. You also want to hit me up on Twitter. My handle is @ZCouples. And then if you search Zach Couples on YouTube, you can find my page. I want to thank you guys all for listening. You're wonderful, beautiful, sexy, outstanding people. Fam, recognized fam. I want you to keep it real, but not to the extent where things go wrong. Stay hungry, stay learning, stay moving. And I'll see you next time. Deuces.